Hi, this is Steve Monglin. I'm Senior Director of Architecture for mas90 for another session of Customize Your Demos. Today, what we're going to take a look at is adding a user-defined table for a project code, and what we're going to do is use that as a way to track expenses and revenues against that by posting those from accounts payable and accounts receivable all the way through to the general ledger, and then do a BIE view on those transactions. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with user-defined field table maintenance. And I'm going to go ahead and add a user-defined table called project. So we'll go ahead and put this in the common information because we're going to really use this table across modules, but it is company specific as opposed to the system database, which is across companies. So I'm going to go ahead and add this new table, and I'm going to call it project. It's going to default in my project code. We'll leave it at a 10-byte field length. We'll specify I'm going to add a few fields to it. So we're going to have a project description, and we'll make that a 30-byte field, and we'll give it a caption, and that's used for the header and the grid. I'm also going to add a supervisor, and that'll be, we'll make that another 30-byte field, and that's where we'll keep track of who the supervisor is for this project. We can go ahead and add a start date. And here I've been using strings, but up to this point, but I'm going to go ahead and make this a date field. And as soon as I do that, it knows that it's a 10-byte field, and that's to account for a 4-digit year and the separators between the months. And I'll put a caption on there as well. And for the default value, because it's a date field, I can choose from these tokens, which will be resolved at runtime. So when I set up a new project, I can say default start date. Okay. Now we can also add maybe a project estimate, and we'll make that a numeric field, and give that a caption as well. Okay, so that's pretty much enough information to create a project. So I'm going to go ahead and OK that. And once again, as for review, this is going to go ahead and create the dictionary entries, generate the ODBC entries, and a Business Insights reporter view. So now you can create a report off of that. So one thing I didn't do last time, even though I showed it, was add it to the desktop. So as soon as I do that, what's going to happen is it's going to update all the menus, and then I can come over here underneath Custom Office, UDT Maintenance. Now I got my project maintenance. Put security on this. So let's say that that's not quite the order that I want those fields to show up. I'm going to go back into User Field Define Table Maintenance, highlight that, and then I'm going to set the grid entry order. So let's just say I want to go ahead and enter the start date prior to the estimate, and then leave the supervisor at the end. But you get the idea. You can move those fields around, and that's the order that they appear left to right in the grid. Okay. So once I do that, I come into Edit. Now I've got them in the correct entry. So I'm going to go ahead and add some project codes, and what I'm going to do is code these up as maybe like a customer ID plus a brief description. So for customer ABF, I'm going to do a kitchen remodel. Now $17,500 because we're just doing a cabinet refacing, and that's going to be Joe. I'm also going to do a bathroom remodel. And because of that jacuzzi tub, we're going to bump that up to $35,000. Not $350. Or $35, what the heck. And that could be Kenny. Okay, so now I've basically got a little data entry screen here that I can track some information about that project. If you decide there's more fields you need later, just go back right into user-defined field maintenance and add a field to it just like you would any other table. Okay, so now that I've got that, what I really want to do now is start tracking expenses and revenues, and I'm going to do that through the accounts payable and receivable, so that this table is available. Common information is one of those modules that automatically gets activated. So every time you set up a company, those sets of data files will be there, even if you're just doing general ledger. So I could even just track general ledger transactions and add this to general journal entry. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to use accounts payable and receivables. So first I'm going to go into the accounts payable, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the invoice detail table. So I'm going to go ahead and edit fields, and I'm going to add a project code to this table. Okay, now the manual entry here says that I basically have to enter this field inside of the data entry screen. So that's fine, as opposed to sourcing from a business object. And we'll get into a little bit of that when we flow through to the updates, and I'll show you what that means. One of the important distinctions from the first session is to make sure that the length of the field that you set up for the UDF and the one that you're going to validate have the same key length. So by taking the default of 10, that's going to work. I'm going to go over to the validation, and I'm going to say I want to define this to validate against the project table. Okay, so once I've done that, I've essentially added a field to the accounts payable detail table, and when I enter that value into the grid, it's going to validate against this table and make sure it's a valid entry. So I'm going to hit OK there. It's going to go ahead and update the dictionaries, and we're good to go. So now what we'll do is go close down AP. We'll open up AR. Now, just to note, on AP, you could do the exact same thing to the check detail, post invoice detail. I think so. The manual check, invoice detail. So that's when you're adding an invoice on the fly during manual check. So you can put these fields on all of these detail entry screens and then have them flow through to the general ledger. So on accounts receivable, we'll go over to the invoice detail table, and that's right here. And I'm going to edit fields. I'm also going to add that project as well. Okay, once again, manual entry, validation, down to the UDT project. Okay, so that's really all I have to do schema-wise to get those into the data entry program. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to the screens, and we're going to go ahead and add those fields to the data entry screen. So if I go back to Customizer Selection, Entry, and I'll go to the P line. So one thing that's of note here is you've got a JC lines, a PJC lines, and a P lines. So those are two different tables. In terms of grids, though, I believe they both use the same screen definition. So it will be something you want to test if you're doing this for a customer. So if they're integrated with job costs, you want to make sure that it shows up in that grid as well. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this panel. And so here I've got my grid. So by default, this is on the Add External Link. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Add Field button. And the way you add something to a grid is you just right-click on either the primary or secondary grid. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add the project code to the primary grid. I'm going to hit the Add button here. And here's my UDF project. I select it. And there's my column heading. I can make that project code or whatever you want to. I'll hit OK there. And that's been added. Now let's say I also want the project description to show up. So I right-clicked on the secondary grid. I can also hit the Add button there. And because we said that UDF is going to validate against the project table, that becomes a data source where I can now take any of these fields, including the start date and estimate if I want to, for display-only purposes, because I can't enter these here. These are really for description purposes, but for purposes of demo, I'll just go ahead and add the description. And then that'll show up in the secondary grid. Okay, so that's all we have to do for invoice data entry. Now let's come over to accounts receivable and do the same thing there. So I hit invoice data entry, P lines, edit panel, right click, okay that, and then we'll put the description on here as well. Okay, so feel free to go ahead and pause this demo and go ahead and try this on your own system. But I'm going to continue on here. So I'm going to save all that. So now what I can do is we can show you what we got here. So I'm going to go into accounts payable, and I'm going to enter an invoice. And we'll do this for, how about airway property? Okay, so on the lines, I have my project here and my project description. One thing to note too is I called that field project downfoot without description, so it's something to keep in mind where you're putting things on grids to make sure you're not using a column, either a column header or a row header that's already being used. For instance, you wouldn't want to add a header called comment because you'd be confused as to which one you're talking about. But anyway, so I'm going to say for this, I'll take $375, and we'll call this lumber, and we'll get that that's for the bathroom model. And we'll go ahead and take the same account number, and we'll take the remaining $625 and apply that to the kitchen. So if you see here, we got the ABS, so we got the project code there. The ALE lookup is automatically added because we're validating against that table. I've got the description down here so that I can validate I'm putting in the right one. Okay, so once I do that, I can accept that. So that's in data entry. So that's great, but how do I actually get that posted through? So to do that, what we need to do is go ahead and back into user-defined field and table maintenance. And what we want to do is make sure we get that to the general ledger. So one thing to keep in mind when you're adding user-defined tables or fields, and you want them to flow from data entry on through to either general ledger detail or the history, is to figure out really where you want this data to end up. So in my case, we want this to end up in general ledger detail. And so we can kind of work backwards and figure out what the different tables are that we need to add this UDF to get to. So if I edit fields here, and I just enter a dummy one, I'm not actually going to save this, but what I'm doing here is taking a look at what my valid options are. So on this one, you'll notice that manual entry is grayed out. That's because the GL detail posting table doesn't have a data entry form associated. It's really strictly a business object. So that enables this business object Dropbox, which we haven't covered yet. So what this is showing me is that these are all of the different update programs that I can use to update into the GL detail posting table. So that could be a general journal update, a recurring journal, the allocation, transactions, and then finally the GL daily transaction update. So these first four are used through general ledger, and this last one is what's used when you're printing and updating the GL data. I'm going to want to use that as the business object because that's the posting object that's going to get me into my detail. So when I look at the data source, that tells me all of the tables that are red, and I don't know if you can tell, but this has actually dropped it down. So there's only one entry in here, and that's the GL daily posting. So what that tells me is in order for me to get a field into the GL detail posting table, I also have to add it to the daily posting. So I'm going through the steps so you can kind of get a feel for how to figure out the flow of things and get from data entry to history. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to cancel out of here, and now I'm going to do that same process for the GL daily posting file just to see, what do I have to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that, and we're kind of working backwards, right, to find out from the final destination back to the source. So Wow. Okay, so here's all the different updates that update to the GL daily posting table. So what's interesting is all 4 of the GL updates also use the same structure. So even though they don't post to the daily transaction register per se, they all go to a common format so that whether I'm posting from GL or accounts receivable or payables or whatever it is, they all go through the same basic logic. So what I'm interested in is the invoice register. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then I'm going to drop down my tables, and there's only one table there. So that tells me in order to get something from data entry all the way up through to the GL detail posting, I have to add a UDF to that detail posting and the daily posting and this AP daily posting work table. So I'm going to cancel out of here. And I know this may seem like a lot of work, but once you've gone through these a few times, you'll get the hang of it. So I'm going to go back to the accounts payable and take a look at that. So that was the AP daily posting work. Edit those fields. Add dummy here. And see, okay, invoice register detail. Oh, I've already got the invoice detail table. So what I'm going to do is make this now my project, because I'm already at this level that I need to be. So I'm adding this project code. And the description here really doesn't matter, since it's not going to be displayed on the screen. But in this case, these are the different update programs that post through to the daily posting work file for the accounts payable module. So that means I'll have GL transactions flowing through the invoice register, the check register, and the manual check register. So I put the project code on the AP invoice detail table, so I'm going to choose that as my source. So what that's going to do now is give me a list of columns to choose from, and here I go. So there's my UDF project. So what it's saying is from the AP invoice register, I'm going to take from the AP invoice detail table this project code and map it into the daily posting work file for the UDF project. So that's going to map that in there. So just some additional things I'd like to show you. If I were to have added this project code to the manual check register invoice table, say, I could go ahead and choose that and the project. Of course, I haven't added that to it, but that just show you that once you set this up for one, it's relatively simple to set them up for all 3. You don't have to go through that process of going, so I'm going to go ahead and X out of that. Okay, so now we've got information going to the daily work, and if you remember that the reason that came up is because we wanted to go to the GL daily posting. So now I'm going to go back into there, and now I'm going to add that project code. And once again, this is for the invoice register update. That's my business object. That's the only table I can choose. And now, because I just added that UDF to that posting work, now I've got that UDF is available to source from the posting work up through to the daily posting. And that same thing applies here on the data sources. I just scrolled over there, but these are all the different updates that get into the daily posting. So that's what you got there. I'm going to hit OK. And then finally, we'll go ahead to the GL detail posting and add the project code there. Okay, once again, I'm going to, now at this point, this is the daily transaction register update, so I'm going to choose that. I got the daily posting file, UDF project. So at this level, what's important to note is that unless you want to add the project code to say general journal entry to do correcting journal entries, you're basically done. If you've added this project code to the daily transaction table, it's automatically going to update into the detail. So hopefully that will become clear when I go through the AR stuff. But anyway, so now that I've done that, that entry that I did in accounts payable is going to map all the way through to the detail. So let's go test it out. Going into my register here, I'm going to go ahead and print this to deferred so that I can update it. And then I'm going to update the register. And then I'm going to print and update the daily transaction register. And update. Okay, so now that the update's complete, one of the quickest, easiest ways to see how that posted. So I'm going to go into Business Insights Explorer and go into the new for 4.3 account transaction view. Okay, so I'm going to right-click anywhere on this column header, go into Column Settings. I'm going to add a new field, and from the GL Detail Posting, because it's native to this table, I'm going to go ahead and choose the project, change the description here. Okay, so over here I can go ahead and say, and then there's my two postings that were made to those projects. So those are the two GL accounts that got hit. Okay, so now that we know everything's working, let's go ahead and shut this down. Let's go ahead and do that same basic process back to the accounts receivable module. So we're going back into user find field and table maintenance, and I'm going to go ahead and open up, well, a little hint here. So since we knew the daily went to the detail, and there's something called AP daily posting work that went to the GL daily, first thing I might want to check is say if is there an accounts receivable daily posting? And there is. So what we're going to do here is go right in. We'll check it to make sure. Say, okay, we're doing the sales journal update. Hey, that's the invoice detail table. That's where I've got it. So let's go ahead and change this to be our project code. And so here's all the things that update to our daily posting work. So you can see I could even add this project code to track cash received against it, or any finances charged against it, or whatever. So that all the GL postings I can put this little project code into. But I'm interested in the sales journal update. And the source tables there are once again the invoice detail and header table. Since the project code is coming from the detail, I'll choose that and scroll down and choose my project. And the same thing with the data sources here. If you choose to add those to others, you can go ahead and select those and set them up there. Okay, so now I've added it to my AR daily posting work. So now what I need to do is go back and add it to the GL daily. So one thing that's kind of handy here is, I don't know if you notice this, there's a recent tables that you've been into. So these will keep track of, like, I think the last 10 that you've been. So I'm going to go right into my GL daily. And wow, I've already got the project there. So what I need to do now is ensure that the mapping is correct. So the way I do that is that I go back to this data sources, and this kind of scrolls over here. But so I've already added to AP. So what I want to do now is for AR sales journal, it chose the AR daily posting work because that's really the only table that it could be. That's the only table available. And then I map that from the project. So you can get the idea that you can, let me scroll this here. You get the idea that for each of these, you could really set up this project. It could be in general journal entry. It could be in the sales journal entry. So if you wanted to track sales orders, if you weren't doing these billings through accounts receivable, but you did them through sales orders, you can do that as well. And the manual check and all those. Okay, so now that I've done that work, because I'm already at the daily file, just to clarify what we talked about before, you can see that if I went back into the detail, the project's already there, It's already sourced from the DTR, so that work was already done from the accounts payable. All I really had to do to complete the loop was get it into the daily from that AR sales journal update. So that's all good to go. And now we can go ahead and add an invoice and update it and see how that works. So I'm going to go into accounts receivable, invoice data entry. We got batching turned on, so I'll set up a batch real quick. And this will be our 01 ABF. And if I scroll over here, I got a little easier to enter. So here I'll go ahead and apply that widget to, notice I used ABC Bath, it should have been ABF. I'm going to do another widget. For the kitchen, maybe a miscellaneous charge. Sales account required. Put that to service fees. And what I got, 610.50 left, so I'll just also put that to service fees. So by advanced calculus in my head, I determined that needs to be 389.50. How about that? But actually, we can go more. Actually, we want to do more because we got more revenue. So let's do some other, maybe 750. And we'll put that to the bath project. I'll assign this back to the kitchen. And that's good enough. So got $1,750. So I'm going to cancel out of that, or accept out of that. Now I'm going to go into sales journal, print this batch, go ahead out to deferred. Skip the gross profit journal, but we'll go ahead and update this. Print the DTR. And update that as well. Okay, so now what we can do is, and I should have saved that, but I didn't. Okay, so I'm going to right click again, and I'll add from the GL posting detail table to project. And I'm going to go ahead and do a save setting as, and we'll call this our job ledger. And I'm going to put a filter on this of non-blanks. And there I've got all of my revenue and expense postings. So I can now go over to my chart, maybe take a look at debit and credit, and right off the bat, and I can maybe group this by my project, and there's a roughly of my debit revenue if I wanted to. But right off, so that gives you an example of what you can do right out of the box with Customize your BIE. Like I said, you can go ahead and expand on this as much as you want, add it to sales journal, accounts payable check. And of course, you know, with FRX, now that this project code is out there, you can do reporting on that as well. So that's it for the BIE demo. Let's just say we want to take it a step further, since this is a deep dive, and we want to go ahead and add it to the general ledger inquiry screen. So I'm going to go into account maintenance. I'm going to go over to, see, I know we did some service revenues. well, this doesn't really matter at this point. So I'm just going to go to the Transactions tab and hit Control F9 because I want to customize this because I want to see that project code on the screen. So I OK that. Now, much like the grid, I have to click on the Add field over here on the Customizer toolbox, and I just right-click on this, what's called a list box. And this basically shows you the format of what we got right now. If I click on that Format tab, now I have an Add button where I can add the UDF project. Okay, and it uses the description that I set up. I can go ahead and put this up further. It shows you a little preview where that's going to show up. So maybe you want it right there next to the posting remark. Hit OK there, save it off. And now I go back into account maintenance or account inquiry because they're really the same task. I call up my service revenue, service fees. Come over to my Transactions tab, and there's my search dialog. I now have a selection on projects, so I can say A, B, F kitchen. It shows me just the postings for that particular project. So now I've got the account detail as well. So let's do one more thing and we'll call it a session. One thing we haven't showed yet is how do I get it on maybe the general ledger detail report. So we haven't modified report yet. So the way to do that is we go back in the user field to find table maintenance, and we go to the general ledger because this is where that table comes from. And what you want to do is look for all these tables that have work on the description. Those are all the work tables that are used to generate Crystal reports. So the GL detail report is right here. That's to add a user-defined field. We'll call this project again. And now here you'll notice also that manual entry is grayed out because there's really only a business object that generates this report. There's no place where I'm entering in this field on it's reporting off the data that's already out there. So the business object, the dictionary knows that the business object used to write to this table is the general ledger detail report. And the data source here is a list of all the tables that are read in order to generate the GL detail report. So we read the account, the GL detail posting, the period posting history, the SI user, and user history. So what's nice about this, I can come into the detail table and go ahead and add my project code. And I'll go ahead and do that. But I could add any other field. You know, if my field, and I could say maybe there's a field in the account table that we don't normally show. Maybe it's in the work table itself. I don't know what that might be. But the point is, you can add a user-defined field to the work table and map any standard mas90 field in addition to a UDF into that to get that on the report. So if there's something out of the box that we at Sage don't put on the report that you want, and it's a standard mas90 field, it's just not on the report, you have the ability to do that by adding UDF to the sourcing it from one of these tables. What you can't do, and you need to be a master developer do, is add another table that we're actually reading from. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll cancel out of here. So getting back to the demo, we got this field added, and that's the schema and definition. So now what I can do is come into Library Master, and I'll go into Setup and Report Manager. And this is where you can go now to modify the Crystal report to put it on there. You could obviously also go out to Windows Explorer and find the RPT and click on it manually. But what's nice about this is it automatically copies the report to the appropriate place. So I'm going to choose the GL detail report, double click on it, and I'm going to say I'm going to do this. I'm going to use this default Crystal RPT regardless of the settings that they do. So you could go, and for all companies, because I want this to apply to all companies, you could do this for a specific company, or specific report setting, so you can change the format of a report, even have a specific all formats as a description there. So that basically set up a format. Now what I can do is click on the Crystal Design button. And I've got two choices here. I'm going to go ahead and choose the detail one. And there's my great looking Crystal report. So one thing I noticed, if I click open the database fields, my UDF does not appear here. That's because this definition is saved within the Crystal RPT. So much like whenever we we release a new version of mas90, we have to go through and verify the database. We do that programmatically, but if you've ever added a column or a table, you want to go through this, you choose the database and hit the verify database option. It's going to prompt you for a logon, and that's done the trick. And now I've got the UDF proclaimed to be a Crystal expert, so this is not going to look pretty. But I'm going to guess I want to put this somewhere on the detail, so I'm going to shove it right and just see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now I can go through and run this and see what it looks like. So I go to my General Ledger Detail Report. So another nice thing, because it's a UDF, I can say, I don't know if you noticed this yet, and I don't want to steal any thunder, so I won't go into it, but this is our new report format screen. I can click directly into the value field. I don't have to choose an operand first, and I can just put kitchen. Okay, and that automatically defaulted me to equal, so now I hit the preview button here. And there I go. So now you've got an example that takes you from data entry, post through to GL, put it on an inquiry screen, and we've also generated and modified the default Crystal report. And that concludes this demo.